Well, joining me live is Dr. Malcolm Davis, Senior Analyst at ASPI in Canberra. Thank you very much for joining us. A lot to unfold. We're hearing the word unprecedented and we're also hearing intelligence failure. What's your take on it?
Well, it certainly was a major intelligence failure. I mean, you can compare this attack against Israel by the Hamas group in many respects to the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and also the events of 9/11, in the sense that all three attacks were never seen by the intelligence community, and yet they had devastating consequences. So I think that the Israeli intelligence services and the American intelligence services should have somehow picked up preparations for this. This was a complex and sophisticated attack that would have taken time to prepare and to plan for, and yet no indication by the Israelis that they had forewarning of this.
And speaking to, quite a few people last night in particular that were in their bunkers, in their, hiding with their families who have lived there for 15 plus years. Some we've spoken to who have lived there their whole lives. They've never experienced anything like it. And again, no warning from locals.
Well, exactly. And I think this attack marks a step change in the threat from Hamas. And by extension, you have to include Iran because Iran is the direct supporter of Hamas. So whilst there's no current evidence to suggest that Iran was directly involved in the actual attack itself, there's a high likelihood that Iran probably was involved in the planning and the preparation of this attack. And the complexity and the sophistication of the attack does suggest that this is something new that the Hamas group have done. And clearly it suggests a much more ambitious set of objectives by Hamas and Iran in carrying out this attack than previous incidents where you've had, a rocket launch or a terrorist bomb or something along the lines of that.
Do you agree with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese saying today that Israel has a right to defend itself?
Absolutely. This is an attack. This is a declaration of war by Hamas. Israel has every right to go in there with heavy ground forces and annihilate Hamas. And that, I think, is what needs to happen. Hamas cannot be allowed to remain in existence after this, because if the Israelis go in and essentially don't decisively defeat Hamas, then this sort of attack will happen again in a few months or a couple of years. We'll be back to where we are now. So Hamas has to be decisively defeated, and Israel has every right to defend itself.
And in terms of capabilities and, weapons and so forth that we have in the US, in Australia, what we're providing to places like Ukraine, in terms of weapons and so forth, will we be asked to provide that? Are we going to be asked to provide intelligence? What do you know?
Look, the Israeli Defence Forces are very well armed. They're highly sophisticated. They're well trained. I don't think they necessarily need weapons or munitions from us at this point in time. If this war was to escalate significantly, for example, if Hezbollah comes in the north, which is a distinct possibility in coming days, then you're talking about a much longer war. And so therefore, we might need to then think about supplying material support. I think where the Israelis really do need assistance, probably, which would be helpful, would be intelligence support, the ability of the United States in particular to provide advanced space-based intelligence. But even the Israelis have sophisticated space-based spy satellites. So I think that, the Israelis can manage things at this point in time by themselves. But if this war does escalate, if it becomes protracted, then we suddenly start to see the need for Israel to count on some external assistance.
And do you think that is a potential, in your opinion, your expertise? How high of a chance do you think that is of occurring?
I think that the chances are quite high that Hezbollah will come in the north, and essentially Israel will then confront a two-front war against Hamas in the south, potentially also in the West Bank, but also in the north against Hezbollah. And I go back to my original point. Iran directly sponsors Hezbollah, it sponsors Hamas. And so therefore, Iran would have to be a factor in this crisis. The Israelis would have to be thinking, how do we prevent Iran from exploiting groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and indeed other radical Islamic groups that it supports? And the potential for the Israelis then to put pressure on Iran directly, I think, would be high. So I think it's that initial escalation by Hezbollah coming in the north that would be a real possibility. And then where it leads from there is anyone's guess.
Tell us more about Hamas, about their weapons, how they came in through air, sea, land.
Well, essentially, I mean, they've surprised everyone in the sense of the sophistication of their attack. Previously, Hamas have been a group that have obviously developed ground-launched rockets, which you're showing there on your screen. But on this occasion, they also did a ground force infiltration into Israeli territory. They used motorized hang glider type vehicles to get troops in from the air. They did sea insertions. So it was a much more sophisticated attack by the Hamas group than previously they've done. And that does reinforce the suggestion that I think that Iran was somehow involved in supporting this or at least preparing for it, providing those sorts of capabilities. It's conceivable that Hamas could have acquired those capabilities themselves, but to practice and train for this attack would have required extensive preparation.
And what about the hostages? They're not just soldiers, they are families, they're children, elderly, women, you name it.
And this is a real concern for the Israelis. The Israelis are very focused on retrieving their citizens that have been taken hostage. In the past, it's been, one or two soldiers, which basically can be rescued by special forces raids, that sort of thing. In this instance, we're talking, potentially hundreds of people being held hostage, including women and children, old people, young babies. Many of them have already been brutalized. Some have been brutally murdered, and we've seen video footage of that online. But there's still hostages that are alive. They're likely to be spread by Hamas through the Gaza Strip, so it's going to be difficult for the Israelis to locate them and rescue them. And so there is a risk that I think that some of those hostages will be killed. But the Hamas group have taken hostages to use as human shields, and this is the ultimate form of cowardice, if you like, that they're using innocent civilians to hide behind.
It's now 7:12 a.m. Sunday in Tel Aviv, getting around, I guess, 24 hours since it happened, and families here in Australia very, very concerned. Of course, without a doubt, people there extremely concerned. What do you anticipate is going to happen in the next 24 or so hours?
I think the key thing will be whether Hezbollah comes into the fight, because the Israelis are very clearly preparing to go into a massive ground intervention into Gaza. Hezbollah have already said that if that happens, that they will enter the war. And so you could then see escalation within the next 24 hours. With Hezbollah coming in. At the same time, you've pointed out the possibility that there are Australian citizens in Israel. I would be advising them to leave as soon as possible. I would not be suggesting anyone travel to Israel or anyone remain in Israel if they are a foreign national.
All right, and what about the people there? I've spoken to some people that have actually, lived there. They have, whether have people in the army, because it's mandatory, isn't it, to have children and so forth go into the army. What's going to be done there? Well,
if they've settled to Israel, well, that's a different story. That's their adopted land. They stay, and if they are living in Israel, then they have to support Israel as their obligation. I think what my comments are referring to are people who are there on business or tourists or that sort of thing. They should be getting out as soon as possible. But certainly people who are living there, who have migrated to Israel, well then, they are living there, and like every other Israeli, they have to defend their country.
We're seeing, big concerts being cancelled and so forth, and, big holidays as well that are occurring in Israel. What do you think moving forward is going to be? Of course, we've spoken about the next 24 hours. Hard to kind of estimate again what you've said is moving forward. But what else will you be looking out for in the near future?
It largely depends on, as I said, Hezbollah entering the war. But the other key question in my mind is how long does this war go on for? Because we are in a war situation here. Let's be clear, this is not just some isolated incident. And the Israelis are clearly preparing the ground and preparing their population for a prolonged war. That's going to be very, costly and dangerous, potential for escalation to a more wider regional war. I think in coming weeks, potentially coming months, it's that danger of a wider war in the region that could bring in Iran, that could bring in, obviously, Hezbollah, but also other radical Islamist groups and so forth in the region, I think is the real concern. And I don't see any return to stability or peace such as what existed prior to this happening in the foreseeable future. I think the Middle East peace solution that was being developed prior to this is dead in the water. And so therefore, the Israelis, alongside the Americans and other allied states, have to prepare for the possibility of a major regional war occurring in the Middle East if this thing does spiral out of control.
All right, well, we have to wrap it up there, but always great to chat to you, and following your Instagram and your Twitter feed, or X tweet, should we say, and getting some updates and your opinions as well. So thank you very much, Dr. Malcolm Davis, and we'll talk to you again, no doubt, very soon.
Thank you.